They handed her the dusty guitar with a sneer, expecting nothing more than a clumsy tune. "Come on, show us what you got," one of the guys laughed, nudging his beer bottle toward her. The bar had gone quiet, half curious, half cruel. A woman, in her late 50s, plain jeans, oversized coat, soft eyes that had seen too much. Nobody knew her name. She just walked in from the cold, asking for a warm meal, and now she was being mocked into a performance she never asked for. But when she placed her fingers on the frets, when the first haunting note vibrated through the silence, the smirks began to fall. She didn't just play. She unleashed 20 years of buried brilliance. And by the time the last note echoed through the bar, everyone was frozen. Because they hadn't just mocked a stranger, they had tried to humiliate a legend.
The snow outside came down in slow, heavy flakes, blanketing the small town in a muffled hush. Inside Murphy's Bar and Grill, the jukebox was playing something twangy and forgettable, lost under the chatter of locals nursing their drinks and bragging about things that never really happened. When she stepped in, nobody noticed at first. She pushed open the door slowly, carrying an old olive-green duffel bag and wearing a coat 2 sizes too big. Her gray-streaked hair was tied in a loose knot under a wool cap. She didn't make eye contact, just walked straight to the counter and asked softly, "Do you serve anything warm?" The bartender, a balding man with a gut that matched his attitude, looked her over. "Soup of the day is chili. $8. She nodded and reached into her pocket. A few coins, a crumpled $5 bill, and silence. "Short," he said. "Sorry, lady, this ain't a shelter." That's when one of the young men at the pool table piped up. "Hey, Mick," he called to the bartender. "Give her the chili, on me, but she's got to earn it." The other guys laughed. "Play us something on that old guitar by the jukebox," he added with a grin. "You play, ma'am?" She looked toward the battered guitar mounted on the wall behind the stage. It hadn't been touched in years. "I used to," she said. "That was all they needed." "Come on, then. One song. We promise not to throw tomatoes." They howled with laughter. Someone pulled the guitar down, brushing off the dust. The strings were still intact, barely. They handed it to her like a joke. She stood in silence, weighing the guitar in her hands. She could still feel the wood, still remember how it had once felt like an extension of her own breath. "Just one song?" she asked. "Unless you blow our minds," the man said, still smirking. The bartender set the bowl of chili on the bar with a loud thunk. She walked slowly toward the makeshift stage, and nobody noticed how steady her fingers were on the fretboard. Not yet. She sat on the stool, adjusted the strap, and took a moment. The laughter in the room didn't stop, but it softened. A few of the men leaned in, whispering bets. "Bet she'll break a string in the first 5 seconds," one said. Another chuckled. "She probably only knows Kumbaya." She didn't acknowledge any of it. Instead, she closed her eyes, her fingers resting gently on the strings. Then she strummed once. The room shifted. Not physically, but something in the sound twisted the air like a breeze cracking open a long-shut window. The guitar's tone, despite its age, rang warm and haunting. It wasn't just the sound, it was how she played it. Each note seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the wood, deeper than the strings. From her, she played again. This time a phrase, fingerstyle. Fluid, delicate and fast. It was something classical, not bar music, not anything they'd ever heard in this place. A Spanish prelude? A flamenco riff? It danced like fire. The young men, who had laughed, grew quiet. One of them slowly set his beer down. Someone in the corner whispered, "Wait a minute." She kept going. Her left hand glided along the fretboard like it remembered every fret, every transition, every nuance. Her right hand plucked and struck, weaving bass lines, melodies, harmonics, like she had 10 fingers where most had 5. Even the bartender leaned in. In a room used to jukebox country and sloppy covers from Friday night regulars, this was a storm of precision and soul. She opened her eyes and locked onto the man who had mocked her first. The guy who offered the chili like a prize. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. She wasn't done. She shifted seamlessly into a darker, bluesy riff, slow bends, raw emotion. Then just as effortlessly, she slipped into jazz chords so complex even a trained musician would need a moment to decode them. It was like watching a ghost come alive, a forgotten goddess of strings, waking up just to remind everyone in the room what greatness really looked like. By the time she struck the final chord and let it ring out, no one moved. Not a breath, not a sound. She stood up, handed the guitar back gently, and walked to the bar. The bartender, who couldn't find his voice, finally just pushed the bowl of chili toward her without a word. "Thank you," she said quietly. Then, she sat at the end of the bar, spooned her chili, and left the entire room wondering, who the hell is she? The silence didn't last long, but what followed wasn't laughter, it was murmurs. Where'd she learn to play like that? She didn't even flinch. That was a Segovia piece, wasn't it? The regulars looked at each other, bewildered. Even those who barely knew the difference between a G chord and a can of Gatorade could feel it in their gut. What they'd just heard wasn't beginner's luck. It was mastery. Behind the bar, Pete, the owner, leaned against the counter with his arms crossed and a stunned expression. "That guitar hasn't sounded like that since my uncle bought it in '72. One of the younger men, the same one who'd cracked the first joke, stood and tried to recover some dignity. She probably just memorized a few fancy things to show off. YouTube or something. Anyone can play fast with practice." The older man at the end of the bar, Joe, sipped his whiskey and squinted at him. "Son, I've played guitar for 40 years. That wasn't fast, that was soul." The young man hesitated, now red-faced, and returned to his seat. Meanwhile, at the far end of the bar, the woman, still nameless to most, quietly finished her bowl of chili. A younger waitress, intrigued, approached her. "Ma'am, that was incredible. Where'd you learn to play like that?" She smiled gently, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. "My grandfather taught me when I was 5, she said. And then I had a few good teachers after that." "You ever, play professionally?" the waitress asked. "Once." She stood and dropped a few bills on the counter, enough to cover the chili 10 times over. Joe watched her closely now. Something in her posture, the way she carried herself, calm but deliberate. Not a performer looking for applause, someone used to being underestimated. He pulled out his phone, curiosity finally boiling over, and typed a few words. "Female fingerstyle guitarist, Spanish prelude." A video popped up, same face, younger, no gray, elegant gown, a concert hall packed, a standing ovation. Joe's eyes widened. He clicked into the bio. Eleanor Grace, once hailed as the ghost virtuoso after disappearing from the classical scene. At the height of her fame in 2003, he looked up, but she was already at the door, pushing it open into the snow. "Hey, wait." But she was gone. The waitress glanced at Joe. "You know her?" He nodded slowly, eyes still locked on the door. "Yeah, we all do now. We just didn't know we did." The days that followed were quiet on the outside. But inside Eleanor's mind there was a war. The video had racked up over 1 million views. A famous classical guitarist from Italy had shared it, calling it a miracle in motion. A scholarship, Foundation for Underprivileged Musicians, offered to name a new fund after her. A teenage girl even emailed her a shaky selfie video, strumming a guitar and whispering, "I want to play like you." Eleanor didn't reply. Not yet. The cabin had once felt like peace, now it felt like a retreat, like hiding. She took long walks through the woods behind the property, letting the wind tangle in her hair. Every time a breeze passed through the leaves, she imagined it sounded like applause. Not the roaring ovations from her past, but something quieter, kinder. A memory asking gently to come back. One evening, she stood by the riverbank, the sun low, painting everything in gold. She brought her guitar, the same one from the bar. She'd avoided it all week, letting it rest in the case like a sleeping animal. Now she opened it and sat on a smooth stone. She didn't play anything famous. Not Bach, not Rodrigo. Just a melody. Her mother used to hum while cooking, soft, aimless, and full of warmth. She didn't notice the tears on her face until she saw them drop on the fretboard. That night, she made a decision. She logged into an old email address she hadn't touched in years, thousands of unread messages, but one stood out. Harrison Langley, her former mentor and the man who had discovered her at age 12. She opened it. Subject: "If this is you, I'm proud of you, and I miss you." The body was short. "You don't owe the world anything, Eleanor." But music, it's not about the world, it's about the one person out there who needs to hear it today. If your hands still remember how to speak, maybe it's time to let them. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. Her fingers moved slowly, typing a reply. Maybe it is. The next morning, she drove into town. She parked outside the little music store near Main Street and walked in, guitar in hand. The owner, a bearded man in his 50s, looked up from tuning a cello. "Can I help you?" She smiled. "I was wondering if you have a few spare flyers. I'd like to offer guitar lessons, just 1 or 2 students. Kids who can't afford much." He blinked, then smiled back. "I think we can manage that." Eleanor posted a single note on the bulletin board. "Private guitar lessons, all ages. The first lesson is free. Music is for everyone." At the bottom, she signed it simply, LEG. At first, Eleanor's guitar class was modest, a few curious kids from the neighborhood gathering in the small back room of a secondhand bookstore. She had no banners, no sponsors, just her guitar, a quiet determination, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Learn to listen first, then play." But then, something unexpected happened. One Saturday afternoon, a passerby filmed Eleanor playing a haunting melody while a group of kids clapped along. The video captured her eyes, calm, focused, and full of soul, and the way the children looked at her, not as a teacher, but as something more. Proof that greatness doesn't always come dressed in fame. The video went viral. Comments flooded. "I can't stop watching her hands. That's not just music, that's healing. Who is she?" Within days, local news stations reached out. Eleanor refused every interview. "This isn't about me," she said simply. "It's about what music can do for a child who's never heard." The class grew. Students came from different towns, some brought by parents who had once mocked Eleanor without knowing her story. A few adults even asked if they could join. Eleanor welcomed them all. The little room behind the bookstore became a sanctuary, where no one was judged by what they wore, where they came from, or how much they knew. Then came the community recital. Eleanor insisted it be held on the same street where she'd once been, mocked. She didn't ask for a stage, just a few chairs, some fairy lights, and a quiet night. One by one, her students played. Nervous fingers stumbled, melodies wavered, but the crowd listened and clapped and smiled. At the end, Eleanor stepped forward, cradling her old guitar. She played the same song the chefs had once forced her to play as a joke. But this time, the notes didn't tremble, they soared. In the front row, one of those same chefs sat quietly. No smugness, no laughter, just quiet respect. He clapped with damp eyes and bowed his head when Eleanor finished. Her music hadn't just redeemed her. It had softened the arrogant, uplifted the forgotten, and reminded an entire town of something they'd lost. That true greatness often arrives without fanfare and chooses kindness, even when it's never been shown any. As the applause echoed through the street that night, Eleanor didn't smile for the crowd. She smiled for the girl she used to be, the quiet one with calloused fingers playing alone in her bedroom while the world passed her by. The girl no one clapped for. She packed up her guitar in silence, even as people approached to shake her hand, to thank her. She responded graciously, but her mind was elsewhere, on the music yet to be played, on the kid she still needed to reach. Fame had knocked on her door again. Agents called. A music academy offered her a teaching position. One Talent Scout left a note saying, "You could have a concert tour by fall." She turned them all down. Eleanor had already found her stage. It was in the cracked walls of a bookstore, in the trembling hands of a boy who just learned his first chord, in the mother who whispered thank you after hearing her daughter play, with confidence for the first time. She didn't need stadium lights to shine. Weeks later, the mayor asked if she would accept a community award for cultural contribution. Eleanor declined gently. If they ever want to honor something, she said, honor the courage it takes to listen, especially when it's easier to laugh. The old chef returned one day with a gift, a pristine custom guitar with her name, engraved in gold. You changed something in me, he said softly, and maybe in all of us. Eleanor accepted the gift but kept playing the old guitar, the one with the scratches and the soul, and so the woman they once mocked became a quiet legend. Not by shouting, not by showing off, but by lifting others with the very thing they once tried to humiliate her for, a melody that refused to be silenced. She didn't win a trophy. She won hearts. She didn't clap back. She played forward. If this story stirred something in you, share it. Tag someone who's ever been underestimated. And drop a note in the comments if you believe quiet strength changes the world more than loud pride ever could. Subscribe for more stories that remind us greatness doesn't always shout. Sometimes, like, it simply plays.